Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. And I would also just like to say, as we're getting started today, that we are sponsored by the Trauma Resource Institute, a nonprofit that I started almost 20 years ago. And if you want to learn more about the great works of the Trauma Resource Institute, go to traumaresourceinstitute.com. You'll be hearing more about them during our break, and you can learn more about the good works that we do all over the world. But today I want to welcome Rebecca Shasanmi Ellis, Dr. Rebecca Shasanmi Ellis, and she is a PhD, master's, MPH, bachelor's in nursing, and an RN. I mean, you have been to school.
So much
Haven't
school,
you?
Elaine.
Oh
So
my
much school.
gosh. So she definitely has been one that believes in education. But before we get started, Rebecca, I would like to say a little bit about just what you've done in the world, because I hope then you'll understand why I wanted to have her come to speak with us today,
Thank
because
you.
we're also honoring the life, the works of Dr. Martin Luther King. That his, we on Monday we had the celebration of his life and his works, and we're continuing to do that all this week. So I know that you're going to say something about that, and we're going to be having a conversation about Dr. King and his legacy and just how important that is right now in the world that we're living in. But let me say a little bit about you first. So you're an assistant professor at Georgetown University's Berkeley School of Nursing. Your long-term research agenda focuses on the intersection of health, workforce and health systems development, mental health, and structural determinants of health, with the goal of reducing health disparities in underserved and resource-limited communities globally. We're talking about people that are the most marginalized. And Rebecca, you really kind of dedicated your life to understanding and helping and bringing public health model to people who, we all need it, but also who sometimes don't have the same access. You have more than 20 years experience as a field-trained health professional. You bring deep expertise in program management, implementation science, and interprofessional education across research, clinical practice, health system strengthening, and policy. What I love about your life work is that you not only do the research, but you also are boots on the ground. And I think this multidisciplinary background uniquely positions you to design, lead, and evaluate complex collaborative programs that bridge nursing, public health, and global health practice. Now, you currently serve as chair of the Public Health Nursing section of the American Public Health Association, and it is a member of the Council of Public Health Nursing Organizations. And prior to joining Georgetown, she was an instructor at Emory University's beginning in 2018. She's also provided direct patient care as a registered nurse in mental health and women's health settings at Sister Love Inc., the first Black woman-led HIV organization in the U.S. South, and our House Health, formerly CAPN clinics, delivering care with homeless shelters in Atlanta, Georgia. And since 2014, Dr. Ellis also served as a research collaborating consultant with the Center of Patient Safety at the University of São Paulo College of Nursing in Brazil, contributing to international efforts to advance patient safety, workforce development, and equitable health systems. Oh my goodness, that was a lot to say. You've done a lot. So today we have invited you to come and talk about what you are inspired and passionate about as a provider of public health who works globally. And so as we get started today, Rebecca, what's on your mind as we're getting started?
As we're getting started, my heart is full. If for those who can see me, my hand is on my chest because my heart is full. Being able to be here with Elaine, who is someone who I take as a mentor and really been a support in really exploring how do we bring the conversation around health equity and mental health and community mental health in conversation. It's really, really great to be here and to be with you all. Thank you.
I want to ask you a question as we get started, because we talk about health equity, and there might be some people that are in the listening to us today that go, well, what does she mean by equity? So what does health equity mean as a public health professional?
So as we think about health equity, it's really how we think about resources that we all have. people being able to be their healthiest and best selves. That includes physical health, mental health, social health, having access to what they need to live their fullest lives. And even spiritual health is part of it. So in all of our best parts. And in public health, we're always looking at how systems can function better to serve people in the ways that they need, particularly when we think about health should be accessible to all, right? Everyone wants to live the fullest life and be able to enjoy. Uh, at, I'm a parent. I want to be able to enjoy my child as well as my mom, right? And my dad. And so thinking about how across generations we promote health and well-being in its fullest forms. So I would say generally that's how I look at health equity.
Well, and your words resonate with me, of course, because the community resiliency model really, in its heart, is about health equity. And I am so proud, I didn't say this in your introduction, that you're also a certified community resiliency model teacher. And so we'll talk more about that as we go through our conversation today. So I'm so grateful that as part of your many educational opportunities that you have, that you've become a crim teacher. But let's talk about Martin Luther King. And so, this episode of Resiliency Within is really dedicated to Martin Luther King and his legacy and the work that he did. Can you share your own personal connection to the legacy of Martin Luther King?
You know, Elaine, I'm also a child immigrant to the US. And so when I think about what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was able to do is really in his monumental work open up doors for so many kinds of people to be able to live out and have access to what he termed the dream, right? And Dr. King termed this dream as being this place that he could see on the mountaintop. He saw this vista, this vision of all kinds of children being able to live, work, play, and thrive together. And so my dad, my parents were actually missionaries.
Oh,
So that connection to faith and faith creating community and that connection to really being servant leaders, ones who are always looking at how we can bring disparate folks together on common values. And that's what I feel Dr. King really means to me. He was someone that I looked up to. Of course, I'm a young kid growing up on the eastern seaboard of the US, learning about Dr. King, but then doing further work to learn more about his activism and his connection across faith groups and really lauding the peaceful resistance of Mahatma Gandhi and really learning from so many different types of people, even in the African context, visiting South Africa and understanding more about apartheid and its relationship to the civil rights movement and Jim Crow South experience. And then also my relationship to Dr. King is that I am also, he went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And my brother is a Morehouse man, my second brother. And I graduated from Morehouse School of Medicine, which came out of Morehouse College. And that's where I got my public health training and graduated from there in '09. So there's a lot of love and relationship. And I think this might be my sixth MLK related event that I've done throughout my life that has just tried to pay homage to this person that really spent his life giving us more opportunity for freedom, liberty, and community connection, and to really honor that sense of beloved community in that we are joining together to advance that. And lastly, I'll share that The last connection to Dr. King is that my brother that I mentioned that is a Morehouse grad, he is the Deputy Executive Director of the MLK Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. So
Oh my, I didn't
there's a
know
lot.
that. Oh my gosh, Rebecca, we got to get him crimmed up.
Yeah,
Yes, we do.
yes,
We got to
we
work
do.
on him. Yes.
I'll make sure he listens to the podcast.
Yes. Well, I have to just share something a little bit personal about me. So I live in Claremont, California, and when I first came to Claremont, I met a couple, and they're much older than me, probably 20 or more years older. And their names were John and Billy McGuire. They both have passed in the last couple of years. But John and Billy were good friends of Martin Luther King and his family. And, of course, I got to know them and they would tell me stories. And so it turned out that John, who was a white man, grew up in the South in a very, very, I would say, atmosphere where racism was very alive. He met Martin Luther King when they were young men before either one of them had their careers and became famous. But John and Martin had a very close friendship. And so when Martin, obviously was put in the center of the civil rights movement, I think he reached out to people that he knew and trusted, and John was one of them. And John was a freedom writer. And
Wow.
so he would tell me stories, and when he would talk to me, he wouldn't say it like I do, Martin Luther King. He would say Martin, and I go, "Oh, that's right, you're talking about." But you would say Martin because he was your friend, right? For me, he's like the iconic person that I've always respected. But it was really sweet to know that about them. And I always like to say, because this show is being sponsored by the Trauma Resource Institute, Billy McGuire, who was also a great friend of Martin Luther King, she gave one of the founding amounts of money to start Try and was on our board of directors, a founding director of the Trauma Resource Institute. And they so embedded everything that you talked about equity and humanity, but also seeing our common humanity. And even when you were speaking about being on the mountaintop, right, the dream, I had this vision of children of all persuasions and colors and cultural backgrounds holding hands. And I always think about Martin Luther King and these beloved friends of mine who have now passed on as he has, as kind of living that legacy and giving it to us so that we can carry it forward. So anyway, I love these little tapestry connections that we're talking about that I think inspire us. But I'm also wondering if you could say something. People may not know the term the beloved community. Could you
Mhm.
say a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So I do not work for the MLK Center, and I am not a beloved community expert. But so Dr. King had the term beloved community for some principal tenets that really govern how we as common humans would come together and really create environments where all people within the community thrive. And there was a thread of having a common sense of human dignity, of really caring about community preservation, so the well-being of all members of the community, and also really bringing us into a space where this this kind of shared value and shared humanity also brings us more in alignment with a higher sense of being. So more in alignment with how we want to be our truest and best selves. Um, I, I guess that would be my summation of my my summation of beloved community. So I don't have all the tenants memorized. So I hope it wasn't a test,
Yes, no,
Elaine.
it was not a test, but I think it's really important that, we understand what that means,
Mhm.
because I think if there is a time when we need the concept of the beloved community in our own country and actually in the world, this is a time to uplift that message. And I think you and I both believe in that, and we wouldn't be having this
100%.
conversation. But I think you also mentioned something that I think is also, to me, part of the beloved community, and that would be just the mental health challenges that people have, and how, when we talk about health equity, sometimes there's more physical health equity than there is mental health equity. And so maybe we can segue into that and talk a little bit about that. Um, so there's a stigma around mental health. It's a major barrier. Research shows that communities of color, immigrants, and rural areas are significantly less likely to seek care, even when they need it. And this resonates with me. You probably have heard about my mother and grandmother immigrating to this country from El Salvador. And I
Mm,
think that it could have been very helpful for my mom to have some kind of mental health um, available to her, but she wasn't oriented that way.
mm,
And she also was oriented that you keep it in the family. You don't go outside the family, which we both know many cultures have that same tenet.
mhm,
So I'm just wondering, what have you seen that actually works to break through stigma of this kind of thinking in
mhm.
a way that can maybe be empowering for people to get the kind of help that they may need that could improve their well-being that actually does contribute to the beloved community.
Yeah. I think two words come to mind, compassion and connection. I think much to what you've spoken to, people are coming from maybe home environments or cultural environments or communities where it's not normalized to talk about these things. But people oftentimes just need to know that there's space being held for them to be able to share or open up about mental health. Challenges whenever they're ready. But when I say compassion and connection, there's also this important part of connecting people to um, where and in what ways they see well-being, particularly within their mind, or some people they don't think of it as mental health, but they just say, I feel a little jittery, or I feel a little nervous, or I've just been thinking a lot or ruminating a lot. It might sound like something different than what maybe us as clinically licensed people might look at it as, but also helping them recognize, is it you feel a little unsettled in your spirit, or is it in your soul? And really thinking about that spirit, mind, body connection, really speaking to people about those connections in ways and in terms that they can relate to. And then once people feel that there's more of this sense of control, or this sense of I can manage what's happening within my body or in my mind, then it may leave them in a better opportunity to move towards adding modalities. Particularly, we've talked a little bit about community resiliency model, and I feel that CRIM is this great bridge to getting people to mental health care, more advanced mental health care. It provides them with skills. Community resiliency model is a set of 6 wellness-based skills, and it connects people with skills that they can use in the here and now to really begin to attune their connection between spirit, mind, body, right? And then when you're able to connect back to that, that cerebral cortex functioning, then you can say, oh, I want to maybe think about connecting to a therapist or connecting to a mental health wellness coach that can help me process some of these bigger topics, or even connecting to long-term or inpatient mental health care as the need might arise.
Well, and as I'm hearing you speak as well, I mean, we're living in some very difficult times right now, because I think that I've also worked in communities that have not had access. And before the last, let's say, few years, there was a lot of distress. But I know that I speak to people all over the world and in our own country that there is an amplification of fear because of the current social political policies and what's happening in our communities. And I'm wondering how, in what you just were talking about, how can we help um, mitigate, reduce some of the suffering that we're seeing people experiencing right now?
Yeah. I think what I've realized, we're all really connected in this kind of digital age, whether it's on, that little device that's always in your hand,
Our
um,
phones are by our side
or on
constantly,
your
yes.
computer, or on a TV, or on your projector. We're all really seeing in real time, even the traumatic things that are happening um, across our world, right? And replaying and seeing this trauma happen. What I would encourage everyone to do is put your oxygen mask on first. It's really, really hard to be the best, to show up as your best self if you haven't taken care of your own resiliency, or even your own response to what might be happening around in the community or the environment. The other thing is then you're in a better position to help others. When you're in a position to help others, that looks like calls, making connections, recognizing or learning the resources that are within the community that might be able to lend themselves to those who might be in distress. I think I mentioned when we were prepping before we started today, I talked a little bit about the impact of ICE raids in my community here in Washington, D.C. And it's happening right here in my ward, and happening often enough for us to see how it's affected the population density within our child's school, in our community school. And so there are families and community members that have seen and witnessed these things. So being a community resiliency model teacher, I'm talking to my school about how do we support the parents? How do we support the kids? How do we bring these conversations into our ward in a way that's accessible to our youth and the families to process what they're feeling? For others, maybe you're not a crim teacher. So what does that look like? Hey, we're going to volunteer in the community garden. I know for a lot of places it's winter now and maybe the garden's not so active, but maybe that looks like, oh, we're going to gather the clothes that we've outgrown, and we want to make that accessible and available to other community members that might be at points of need because their housing's been destabilized, or any other points of need. But the more we're able to come to get to take care of our resiliency, and then be able to afford that support to others, is really crucial.
Well, and I've also seen in some communities when you're saying that, and I want to lift this up, is that people have been also, some people are afraid to leave their homes to get groceries. And so there are different organizations, nonprofits, for example, that will get the list. And they'll actually, there's been lots of donations of food because some people don't feel like they can go to their jobs, and people are delivering food. I mean, there's a lot of
Wonderful.
really good, like, I always say, what else is true? That
Yeah.
there is this suffering, but then you see people mobilizing in a way that we have to help our community. But I also want to say one thing because I have a very dear friend who's Black, and she now carries her passport with her always.
Hmm.
And when she said this, and she's a physician, and
Hmm.
I thought, oh, this is such a scary time. She was born here in the United States, but how is this happening in communities of color?
Yeah, and I would say my neighborhood here is actually predominantly Black, and then we have Spanish speaking, a good sized Spanish speaking community. So it's a community that is a haven for people, or respite from, maybe the environment that is downtown DC, where you would not feel safe, you would not feel welcomed. You can find that safety and that welcome here. And so it's made it an increased target. As I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the connection to Dr. King, I'm a child immigrant to the United States. Although I'm documented and all the things, we know that, even with documentation, you could still be picked up by ICE. And so that real fear of, well, I was, transparency here, I was naturalized through my mom. My mom became a US citizen. So then I became a citizen with her when she went and swore in and to help hold the Constitution of the United States of America. So I don't have that certificate. And when I looked up how much it would cost for me to get a naturalization certificate of my own, Well, over $5,000. And so, we think about what does it mean to be fearful that if you maybe are a perceived threat or not a threat, and an ICE agent is just like, hey, you're here. I'm going to toss you into the paddy wagon too. What does that mean for what will happen? So we all have those considerations, but something that I've come to realize is that we have to be the best advocates in the way that we know how for our communities, but also what Dr. King believed was for the generations to come.
Yes.
And you can see, for those who will watch this on YouTube, there's a quote behind my head from Dr. King. And it's really our collective action. And I was just watching the Prime Minister of Canada's speech at the World Economic Forum. And he was talking about how, when you're a smaller power, so like, being a middle income country, smaller power than the big powers, how can you stand up? Well, it's in our collectively saying, actually, these are our tenets of beloved community. This is what community looks like for us. And we're not buying into community is isolation or targeting of people, but rather community is our coming together and appreciating and celebrating our common humanity. And these are the different ways that we're invested in cultivating that in on our block, in our neighborhood, in our town, in our city, and on and on and on. And we're seeing that all over our country right now, that many people are like, you know what? I want, I, my value system appreciates community. And these are the ways that we're coming together to celebrate that.
And as you're saying that, it also is respectful dialogue and how we talk with one another.
Yeah.
And so I just love how you just, describe that because I think that's the very essence of what is important for me as a human being and the Trauma Resource Institute and how we started it, but it's also really embedded in the tenets of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi and
Yes.
the Dalai Lama and
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Amen. Right? Well, we're going to take a short break. I mean, I knew that we were not going to have problems. Oh my goodness, we're going to probably have to do a part two, Rebecca. I think we may have to. We'll see if you're willing. But we're going to take a short break and we'll be back with the amazing Dr. Rebecca Ellis, and we will continue this conversation. And we want to hear more about the good work that she's doing in Washington, D.C. All right, we'll be back in just a few moments. Welcome back to Resiliency Within. I am here with Dr. Rebecca Shasanmi Ellis. We are having a lovely conversation about her really dedicated and I say inspired work,
Thank
um,
you.
bringing public health, mental and physical health to your community, not just your immediate community in Washington, D.C., but how you also work internationally. And we've been talking about the beloved community. And I think that if Dr. King knew you, he'd be very proud of the work that you're doing. And I just also loved hearing that your brother and what he does in Indiana. So it's pretty amazing that we're having this conversation and linking all this wonderful um, common humanity into celebrating Dr. King's life. But one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about, we can segue, I've shared with you, my status of, my mom and grandma coming from El Salvador, and you came from another country. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I am from Nigeria. So came, as I mentioned, as a child immigrant. My parents were missionaries for a Nigerian denomination, and they were sent over to the U.S. To really plant churches because there were so many Nigerian immigrants, and Nigeria is the most it is the it is the fifth largest country in the per capita in the world, and then it's has the highest Black population of any country in the world, and so many people, most out what is it? I think it's like almost four out of every 10 Africans you'll meet are actually from Nigeria,
Oh, I did
in
not
the
know that.
diaspora.
You're educating me. Okay. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So when my dad first started coming to the US in the 70s, and then eventually we moved here in the 80s, um there were just a lot of Nigerian immigrants who had faith communities that they enjoyed and were raised up in, but didn't find connection to communities here. And so a lot of churches started to send their missionaries out to Europe and the US and other countries to provide that. So we moved like every 2 years. So people talk about military brats.
Yes.
I wasn't a military brat. I was a missionary kid, and we moved every 2 years and kind of establishing those kind of networks of community, primarily here in the US. And then eventually my dad was transferred to Europe, Austria, and Switzerland. But yeah, so that's kind of my upbringing and my connection. And people are like, oh, she sounds so very American. Well, when you come at 4, you learn how to switch the accent on and off.
Oh,
Uh,
you can do that. Oh my goodness, that is amazing.
so tí n bá ń sọ Yorùbá ń sìn, ẹ mọ̀ pé ọmọ Yorùbá ni mí. So if I start speaking Yoruba now, then you know that, oh, okay,
So
she's
there you go. She
Nigerian.
has those Nigerian roots.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I wish I could say that I spoke Spanish, but it was a different time when my mom came and that my dad, who was American, did not want her to speak Spanish to us. So actually, I'm going to Mexico in 2 weeks where I'm going to be speaking at a conference. And I'm very sad that I can't do the whole thing in Spanish. So I will have someone who will be speaking for me, but I can say some things. I can do conversational Spanish. So, but I
Sure.
think that because immigration is such a big deal right now in the United States. And I just want to honor also in this conversation the immigrants that our families and you personally represent. I often, I think in a sad way, my grandmother, of course, and mom have passed. My grandmother they both had very heavy accents and did not have the ability they did to switch. But they would have been very targeted if they were alive. And I know that for both of them, it would have been so hard for them to live through these times. But I just want to express, and when you tell me about your family, the gifts that our families have not only brought to us personally, but to America. And I also think it's interesting as we've spoken today, how we also have an international lens. And that is connected to Dr. King and the beloved community because we came very directly in terms of our histories from other places. You've been to Nigeria, I've been to El Salvador. And so those are parts of me as well. But if you ask me, well, I'm an American and I do love America. It saddens me to what I'm seeing right now in terms of how people are being treated and the fear that's happening, knowing that that would directly influence my family. But when I think of your contributions to America, Rebecca, and I think I've made some pretty good contributions to America too. But
Okay.
I want to remind everyone who may be listening to that we have come and we have that immigrant lens because of our legacy and our family history. So,
Absolutely.
So I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about that, but it certainly touches me that we're having this conversation right now.
I think you spoke a little bit to accents and how that might determine how you're received. And I was sharing this, I was on a panel a few months ago and just sharing about the immigrant experience and being a child of immigrants or a child immigrant. I didn't realize how much I was um, translating for my mom, you know, she came at 45, 46 years old. She'll be 85 this year. And you just think about, wow, like that, that ability to code switch was protective for me, right? But my mom didn't have that same ability. And so helping her translate and move through systems that even though to me, it sounded like she was speaking perfect English. People were like, huh? What she say? What she say? And so realizing that that's something real and experienced, right? And so I'm hopeful that for many who might be listening to this, that we all practice a little bit of tuning our ears a little bit to hearing one another just a little bit clearer, and giving each other grace because we have many points of transitions in our lives and we all need that kind of grace and um, that just kind of tuning in so that it can help others transition in different ways.
Well,
Yeah.
it's so interesting as you were saying that I'd never thought about this before in this way, is that my mom as well. I mean, people would talk to me rather than her from a very young age. So it also put me in a role which it was not good for me of being a kind of a parentified child and sometimes translating things that really I shouldn't have any business translating. My mom was very feisty, so but she would stand up to people who would continually ask me. She goes, "No," and just then they couldn't understand anything she would say because she'd get a little fiery and say, "Please talk to me. I'm the adult," right? But there was a stress in the fact that there was an accent. And that was something that myself as a child experienced. And so when we talk about this, our both lived experiences, but I'm wondering too, here we're also in professions that we have to listen. And I'm wondering about, did that affect us, Rebecca? We'll have to talk more about that another time, but I'm thinking that it probably really did because I had to listen very closely because I was sometimes put in situations and also in writing. So my mother could not write English very well. So as I became, um, when my brother and sister, they were much younger than me, I would have to write the notes to the school, like when they were sick or those kinds of things. So again, other ways that I was put in a situation that were different. I don't know if you had to do that as well, but it was also written, not only spoken.
I think for us in our experience, because Nigeria was colonized by the British.
Okay, so you already had
So
the
my
written
mom can read
language.
and write
Yes,
English.
yes,
She could speak English as well, but very heavily accented.
yes.
I was laughing with the group that I was talking to. It was a psych mental health nurse practitioners of color conference. And I was saying, I actually didn't realize that my mom had a heavy accent until just recently. It was like in the last 10 years where I was in another room. I thought she had a friend coming to visit her in the house. And I was just like, who's the lady that came in? Her accent is really, really heavy. And it was my mom. She was just talking
Oh
on the phone.
my goodness.
And you know, it's because of all the years of, I didn't know that in my mind, I was always that I had a voice for her because I was always translating it, right?
Yes.
And when you grow up as a kid speaking multiple languages, you don't realize how you're in many situations and you're always translating. And of course, having done work in Latin America and the Caribbean and South America, Spanish and Portuguese are swirling around in my head too. And so yeah, I laughed at myself. I said, "Oh, you didn't know your mom had an accent?" But yeah, I mean these are our parents. They're our first connection um to experiencing and also valuing common humanity, right? And so the voice that we give them lends itself to whatever the positive formations we might have of that relationship and that connection.
Well, I really thank you for sharing the thing about I did not hear, I learned English from my mother.
Yeah.
But she did not have an accent to me. And I was 14, and I remember the day it happened when I had a new friend who came to visit the house, and she had moved to California from Ohio. I don't think she knew at that time many people that had a Spanish accent, right? And so she said, she goes, "Oh, Elaine, I'm so sorry that your mother's an alcoholic." And I said, "What?" I said, "No, she's not an alcoholic. What do you mean?" But it was because she had never heard the accent. And for me, there was no accent, but all of a sudden,
Mhm.
like those connections came through. Anyway, that would be an interesting conversation to have to others because, when did that all of a sudden happen that you knew that, yes, that apparently to others, my mother had an accent, but not to me. Right.
My mom.
That's right, exactly. Well, we've kind of gone down a segue, but I want to kind of get back to, I think, but I hope that you're all hearing when we talk about our immigrant experience as children, that this is happening right now with kids that also haven't, I wasn't living with the fear of ICE. I would definitely, I think, in my family, if it was a different time, would have been living in fear. And so I think we need to think about how we treat children and help them. And I'm so glad that I hear you're working with schools in your area. So maybe we can segue to that. Here you have taken your work, you're working in Washington, D.C. I've had a couple conversations with you where I get so inspired about your ideas of really bringing equitable treatment to your community. And so, Rebecca, over to you. What do you want to share with us about the work you're doing?
Yeah, I'm really, really excited. We are doing some great work. As Elaine shared, I'm an assistant professor at Georgetown University, Berkeley School of Nursing. And so we've started some really great partnerships with some local schools and local community-based organizations. And working with youth, I think oftentimes when we think about what nurses and nursing can do, we're just thinking about the bedside. But as a public health nurse, I'm always like, hey, we've got to get into the community. We've got to think about caring and providing low resource ways for people to care for themselves, maintain their well-being, so that they don't have to come to the hospital. They don't have to come to that advanced tertiary care. So one of the things we're doing, we've partnered with Kimball Elementary in Ward 7. And Kimball is PK3 to fifth grade school. And at Kimball, we are doing a nursing STEM program. So we're bringing in everything from talking about well-being, consent, to doing science experiments. And we've really developed a curriculum that, and we will, in our mental health part, we will be bringing CRIM and teaching this to kids from PK3 to fifth grade. So that really, really excites us. And the other part of the work that I'm embarking on, I'm also a researcher. And so there've been a couple of communities that I currently have my nursing students doing community-based learning and experiential learning with, and learning alongside some of the housing development communities in Ward 6 and Ward 7. And we are exploring bringing CRIM to youth. So we'll be working on this project. I'm so excited. And if you know anyone out there who wants to support this work, let me know. I'm excited to be partnering with you all at TRI, Trauma Resource Institute, to be able to bring CRIM to youth from ages 6 to 17. As people may or may not know, I know that DC has been in the news for, really dangerous high crime place. And I have to say, I have lived here now for it's almost 2 years, moving from Atlanta to DC. And honestly, it's so safe. I have been really impressed. But what has been increasing here in DC is young people getting more engaged um, with violence in a way that speaks to how do we create environments or ecosystems, right? Where we can prioritize their well-being, the well-being of their family systems and communities, especially from community-based the after school programs that they're part of, the staff that are connected with them, and we want to bring Crim in a way that really harnesses that the diffusible model that we appreciate Crim for, right? So if you can activate your own resiliency, then you can guide others towards resiliency as well. And so we're really looking forward to working with the youth in defining that. Um, I really um, I really have a life course perspective about how I approach mental health and the work that I'm doing. And so we're also, this is a burgeoning conversation. Hopefully, I'll have more for you, but also bringing CRIM to perinatal and postpartum women also here in our community. So these are some of the projects that are on the slate. Some more in active implementation, and others are in development. So we're really excited to join with our community to expand access to community mental health and bringing our nursing students into conversation with that, and working alongside and walking alongside our community.
So I just want to also remind our listeners that when Rebecca talks about CRIM, she's talking about the community resiliency model, and you can learn more about the community resiliency model and how you might want to bring it to your community through the Trauma Resource Institute website. We have many offerings on the website where you can listen or watch an orientation to the model. And also, I've spoken many times on resiliency within. You can look in our archive and I've spoken about the community resiliency model and others in terms of just its adaptability across cultures, across communities. And want to just say that the reason why it's being used so widely, and I'm just so appreciate Dr. Ellis and what she's doing through Georgetown and through her community work, is that we have statistically significant reductions in depression, anxiety, uh, secondary traumatic stress, but also some really recent research that was done in Rwanda showing statistically significant increases in compassion and forgiveness. So, in a world where we sometimes see a lack of compassionate language and care and respectful speaking to one another. CRIM can be adapted in many situations. And what the neuroscientists tell me, because I say, why is that when we learn how to regulate our nervous system, that all of a sudden people become more self-compassionate and compassionate towards others? And what has been explained to me is that when there's more blood flow, and here I'm talking to Dr. Ellis, who knows this much better than I do, there's more blood flow and there's coming into our brain. And when that happens, we actually lean into well-being and not contract into negativity and sometimes mean-spirited thinking. So did I say that correctly, Doctor? I'm going to say Dr. Ellis.
You absolutely did. You absolutely said that correctly. And so, as the wonderful thing about the community resiliency model is it's teaching people about how does the nervous system work? How does it get back to this sense of equilibrium, release, and expand the connection to oxygen and all the healthy things flowing into the body and brain, and bringing one back into connection with that kind of higher ordered connectedness and those the feel good release. So I one of the things I remember from my community resiliency model training is we talked a lot about what are signs that you've released, right? And noticing the sensations within, right? And what's a sign of release. And one of the things I I remembered your release. Was it the yawn?
I yawn. I just yawn and
Yes.
yawn and yawn, Rebecca. Yes.
So, and I yawn as well, or sigh. Those are the releases. And so when you think about, oh, those negative feelings that were elicited by that stressful situation or the remembrance of a traumatic situation, now I can release from that, and be able to move forward in the here and now. It's just amazing what we can do when we give people that sense of,
That's right. That deep breath that comes spontaneously,
yeah.
not necessarily by saying take a deep breath, but when we, utilize the skills and we can feel our body coming into greater balance, right? That's a physiological response.
Mhm,
We can sometimes yawn, sometimes there's a little shaking.
mhm,
We even have what
mhm,
colloquialisms, right? Shake it out. And it's happening just spontaneously, which, if you could see us, we're both smiling right now. We're
mhm,
saying this, but I cannot believe we only have a few minutes left. It's gone by so fast.
mhm.
So I'm wondering, do you think as we're ending, you could read the quote um, from Dr. King so that people can hear it?
Absolutely. So the quote, and for those who can't see me, this is the quote. Courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. Cowardice, submissive surrender, or circumstance. Courage breeds creativity. Cowardice represses fear and uh, and is mastered by it. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Um, Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it political? Excuse me. Is it polite? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes time when we must take a position that is neither safe, nor polite, nor popular, but one must take it because it's right. And that is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm so glad that I was able to spend this time with you and really advocating for justice, and really thinking about mental health as part of our um, drive and pursuit towards health equity, for all, for all.
Dr. Rebecca Shasanmi Ellis, thank you so much for being on the show today and
Thank
for bringing your wisdom and your advocacy. I know that you are just starting and you're not done, and you've already done a lot.
thank
So
you.
I'm so glad to be in partnership with you in what we might see that we can do together. And I
Absolutely.
just so appreciate your time today in sharing your wisdom. And my audience always hears me say at the end of the show, what else is true? So
Mhm.
yes, there's suffering. Yes, there are experiences that are happening in our world that are difficult. But I could not have said it better that we need to put our oxygen mask on first. And if we can cultivate our own well-being, that we will have a much better chance to navigate the difficulties that our world is facing today. And we can create a better tomorrow, which I think was all what the beloved community was all about.
Absolutely.
So, with that, this is Elaine Miller Karras signing off for Resiliency Within until we meet again. Remember what else is true.